Tonga will enter a nationwide lockdown on Wednesday after 5 COVID-19 cases were reported in the country. And this comes as the island nation recovers from ashfall and tsunami from an underwater volcanic eruption on January 15th. And for more, our correspondent Greg Navarro joins us from Suva, that's the capital of Fiji, and that Suva is about 750 kilometers away from Tonga's capital, Nuku'alofa. Greg, so this is the situation that Tongan authorities have been concerned about with aid coming in post-tsunami. So what is the COVID situation then? How is this going to affect all the recovery efforts?
Well, we can tell you that lockdown is scheduled to go into effect in just a couple of hours, and those COVID concerns are what have kept journalists, teams like ours, from actually being able to get to Tonga during all of this. The biggest concern in a country that has been relatively COVID-free during the entire pandemic. Before this week, they had only recorded one positive case. The biggest concern was if COVID did enter the country, especially considering how vulnerable it is at the moment because of that disaster, that it would spread rapidly. There are about 5 cases now, we believe, up to 5 cases. That's an increase from just a few hours ago when we were told there were 2 cases. We don't know how long they were there. There is, well, there's been no identification as to where they've come from. We do know the country took all the precautions they could in terms of using what's called contactless aid, meaning when ships arrive, they'd put those goods that they were offloading onto the wharf, onto docks, and then workers in full PPE gear would then take them and distribute them through. Now, while we don't know where those cases, they haven't linked them to any particular crew. We can tell you, though, that last week there was an Australian naval ship carrying 600 people. 23 of those members tested positive for COVID. There were some discussions between the leaders of both countries as to what to do with that ship because it was filled with aid. In the end, they made the decision to go ahead and bring that to the dock again using that contactless aid and contactless method of unloading that aid and distributing through the country. There's another real concern at the moment, and that's we're told that some of the close contacts of these positive cases have traveled to Tonga's outer islands. That's what's triggered this countrywide lockdown.
Greg, so will more aid be arriving in Tonga soon? And what's the state of the power and communications there?
Well, we'll start with the power and communications first. Power has been restored to many of those areas that were initially impacted. Obviously, there are a lot of islands within Tonga, a lot of areas that were really severely impacted, not so much by the volcano, but by the tsunami, and work will continue. As far as communications go, remember this, that Tonga has one single communications undersea cable. It actually extends from here in Fiji all the way to Tonga, some 750 kilometers as total distance. Now, the volcano and subsequent tsunami damaged that cable in a couple of places. That cut off internet access for the entire country, made cellular phone coverage very difficult. There is a specialist ship that has arrived in Tonga and is assessing the damage. Once they determine where those breaks are, they're going to cut a section away, remove it, replace it with a new one, and splice it together. That is a highly technical job, and we're told that it could take about 2 weeks before things are repaired if all goes according to plan. As far as more aid ships, we know the majority left the port here in Suva over the weekend. This is the closest port to Tonga. A number of those ships carrying dozens and dozens of shipping containers of supplies, everything from food to tents to building equipment. They're scheduled to either arrive today or they have arrived within the last couple of hours. There are further aid efforts taking place here across Suva, smaller organizations trying to tailor their what they collect to the specific needs of Tonga. One thing the UN told us, which is pretty interesting about this disaster, and more importantly the recovery, is that Tonga is in charge of its own recovery. It's something it's actually been planning for. They've had shipping containers with supplies pre-positioned around parts of the country. In the event of a disaster, they'd be able to immediately access some of those relief items, including building supplies. So again, the biggest challenge for Tonga right now is to make sure that the aid coming in is what it specifically needs so that it can speed up its own recovery.
Thanks so much for the update, Greg Navarro in Suva for us.